He's always breathing down his neck. Well, you see, you just breathe down his sister's neck and make them both jealous.
In the 1950s, Hollywood shimmered like a dream. But in that dream, being gay was a sin, and love between two men was something to be buried in the dark. Sal Mineo, the young star of Rebel Without a Cause, was the first to cross that forbidden line, and the first to pay for it. He loved men in a world that demanded they only pretend to love women. And Hollywood, with lights bright enough to burn through a soul, punished him with silence. Years later, people said Sal had written a list, 9 men he could never forgive. They weren't strangers. One was a screen idol worshipped across America. Another, the president's brother-in-law. Some had shared his bed, then denied his existence on live television. For Sal, each of them became a chapter in the same tragedy, where love began with desire and ended with betrayal. What turned Sal Mineo's love into hatred? And why were the men he once loved the very same men he despised the most? Let's begin with the first, a legend who treated love like a game. Marlon Brando, the man who turned Mineo into a game. Sometimes Sal Mineo asked himself, if Brando hadn't smiled at him at Elia Kazan's party that night, would his life have been different? Maybe he would still believe in love instead of learning to hate it, to hate the man who made him believe he was loved, only to vanish as if he had never existed. He once said on a drunken night, "Brando doesn't love anyone. He only loves the feeling of making people believe they're loved." That wasn't bitterness. It was a diagnosis, precise, cold, and deadly. In 1962, Sal was invited to a party hosted by director Elia Kazan in the Hollywood Hills. Everyone knew party was just a cover. In truth, it was where power and desire shared a table. Brando arrived late, as every legend has the right to do. He walked in with 2 buttons of his shirt undone, a half smile, eyes both tired and arrogant, tilting the entire room toward him. Sal stood in a corner, his glass trembling. When Brando turned, a single glance was enough to make the young actor feel the air itself had shifted. Brando came over and asked in a low voice, "Are you afraid of this crowd?" Sal smiled. "I'm only afraid when they stop looking at me." Brando laughed, a laugh like a small blade, light, but enough to draw blood. From that moment, Sal knew he had lost. That night, they both slipped away from the party and were last seen at the Chateau Marmont. The desk clerk later said, "Room 304, lights off till morning." No one asked anything more. In that world, people knew to pretend they didn't know. But Sal wasn't the kind who could forget. He began to drown in Brando. The husky voice, the tobacco-stained hands, the way he made everything around him feel meaningful. Brando came and went like the wind, with no appointments, no warning. Every time the door opened, Sal lost track of himself. Every time it closed, he no longer knew who he was. They never said, "I love you." They lived a string of hazy nights where the line between real and performance blurred. For Brando, it was a game. For Sal, salvation. One night, Sal asked softly, as if afraid of his own question, "Are you afraid of being loved by someone?" Brando poured a drink, watching the light reflected on the glass. "No, I'm only afraid of having to love back." That answer pushed Sal over the edge. He knew he was only a supporting role in that man's life, but he kept acting, because at least being there was better than being nowhere at all. A few weeks later, the doorman at the Chateau Marmont handed Sal a piece of paper. The handwriting was scrawled, the paper folded in half. "I don't cultivate feelings, not for anyone." No goodbye, no signature, no period. A message cold as steel. Sal slipped the note into his wallet and carried it for years. Not to remember, but to remind himself, love had once been real, even if only with one man. After that, he started drinking. Not to get drunk, just enough to blur, enough to imagine that door was still open, that Brando would still come back, like an unfinished role waiting to be completed. But Hollywood allows no unfinished roles. The press began to write, "Sal Mineo, a star gone astray." They said he had lost his direction, lost his appeal, lost his reason to exist. Brando kept thriving. New films, new awards, new lovers. He never mentioned Sal, not once. In a rare interview, when asked about Brando, Sal said only, "He doesn't love anyone, but he makes everyone believe they're loved." The line spread like poison. Those who had been close to Brando fell silent. Those who had loved him lowered their heads. Everyone knew Sal was right, but no one dared agree publicly, because to say it aloud was to admit they too had been pawns in that game. Sal no longer loved Brando. He only hated him, a hatred bound to the same old craving. He hated himself for still remembering those hands, that voice, that breath. Hated that in his dreams, he still spoke that man's name like a reflex. Years later, in a notebook found after his death, a single line was scrawled, "I used to think he destroyed me because he didn't love me, but in truth, he destroyed me because he made me believe I was worthy of being loved." Those words read like a final confession to his enemy. Marlon Brando wasn't just the man Sal Mineo hated. He was addicted. The thing that made him wake in the night, reaching for empty air, telling himself, "Never trust a man who can perform emotions better than he can feel them." And now, let's turn back to the man who first planted the seed of love in Sal Mineo, and then destroyed it. 2. James Dean, the man who made Mineo believe in love, then destroyed it.
You always have had. Why? Why? It's so easy to be friends with people. Look, man, why don't you just give Dad a chance? Why don't you show him that you love him?
Too soon, abandoning him in a world where no one dared to be honest anymore. Every time he passed Melrose Avenue, Sal Mineo would turn his face away. He couldn't bear the sight of those old posters of a young man in a leather jacket, staring straight ahead as if he were challenging the world. That face was everywhere, on coffee mugs, t-shirts, posters, and in memories he could never erase. People called it the symbol of rebellion. Sal called it by two words, James Dean. In 1954, they met at the audition for Rebel Without a Cause. Sal was 16, Dean 23. When Dean walked in, the room fell silent. He wasn't handsome in the classical way, but there was something in his eyes that felt dangerous, a naked, almost provocative unease. Sal later recalled that Dean simply said, "You look like someone who knows more than his years." Sal answered, "And you look like someone trying to forget that." From that moment, the line between them vanished. They went everywhere together, cheap coffee shops in Fairfax, the backlot parking spaces, those nights lost inside the Beverly Hills Hotel, where Dean would put on quiet jazz and smoke by the window. In that dim light, Sal believed he'd found the one person who understood him, the one who didn't need him to pretend to be proper. Director Nicholas Ray knew but kept silent. He only told his assistant, "Don't interfere. Plato has to truly love Jim, or this picture dies." And indeed, in the final scene when Dean wrapped his arms around Sal, the entire set held its breath. No one knew whether they were acting or simply being real. Afterward, Dean whispered in Sal's ear, "If I die, burn all our private reels." Sal asked, "Are you afraid someone will see?" Dean answered softly, "Hollywood can kill you with a headline." 3 weeks later, on September 30th, 1955, James Dean's silver Porsche Spyder was crushed on Route 466. The news hit like lightning. The whole country mourned the rebellious icon. Only one person didn't cry, Sal Mineo. He just sat and stared at Dean's photo in the paper, hands trembling, murmuring, "You were right, James. They killed you with what they loved most. After the funeral, Sal disappeared for months. Friends said he became haunted, taping over door cracks for fear of hidden cameras, sleeping with the lights on, always carrying a photo of Dean in his pocket. Whenever he got drunk, he called other people by the name James. In an interview, a journalist asked, "Do you think Dean truly loved you?" Sal was silent for a long time, then replied, "If he did, he left me to live with it, and I hate him for that." In the years that followed, Dean was still everywhere, in the radio songs, in the way light fell through a window, in the eyes of other men Sal tried to love. When Paul Newman touched him, he saw Dean again. When Brando spoke, that husky voice was still Dean. Dean's death left Sal unable to believe in love, only in waiting. He waited for someone who could love him without hiding. But Hollywood was not made for that. In 1960, during the filming of Exodus, a reporter asked Sal, "Do you think real love exists in this business?" He answered, "It exists, but only long enough to kill the first person who believes in it." That was the last time he spoke of James Dean in public. But those close to him knew Dean had never left. In the final journal found after Sal's death, there was a brief line with no name. "If he were alive, maybe I would have killed him. But because he's dead, I have to carry him for the rest of my life." That hatred wasn't loud. It seeped in, like metal rusting in blood. And perhaps somewhere in the next world, James Dean was still smiling, knowing that even in death, he was the one man Sal Mineo could never escape. If James Dean made Sal Mineo believe that love could save him, then the next one taught him that sometimes love itself is the most elegant form of betrayal. 3. Paul Newman, the man who taught Mineo betrayal.
No, we can't print that. Did you hit the body sock sleeve? Answer. Give me the answer. Did you hit the body sock sleeve? Yeah, I only want to go. I only want to go.
Sal. Mineo once told a friend, his voice hoarse as if he were burning his own throat from the inside, "If there's anyone I hate so much, I want to forget his face. It's Paul Newman." He didn't say it out of jealousy, didn't say it out of disappointment. He said it out of humiliation. Because Paul Newman not only made him lose a lover, he also made him lose the right to live as a real human being. In 1960, when he was cast in Exodus, Sal believed it would be his chance to start over after the too early glare of Rebel Without a Cause. He was only 21, while Newman was already a monument, the man with blue eyes women wanted to die in. On set, Newman didn't need to try to make people adore him. He only had to smile. And every time Sal stood next to him, he felt small, like a planet orbiting someone else's sun. Their friendship began with light jokes, with glances that missed a beat. People say that during a desert scene, Newman reached out to straighten Sal's collar, a simple gesture that made the entire crew fall silent. Everyone saw it, everyone understood it, but no one dared to speak, because Hollywood then had no place for men to look at men like that. After the final day of shooting, Newman asked Sal out for a drink. "We made something beautiful," he said. "Not the film," Sal replied. "This moment." Newman smiled, a smile that made Sal believe the world could be kind. And then they began meeting often, not at bars, not in public, only in a small apartment in Benedict Canyon, where Newman arrived in silence and left before dawn. They never spoke about that because saying it out loud was the same as suicide. But Sal knew that every time Newman touched his hand, he was reaching for something Hollywood could never grant. A moment of honesty. One night, Sal asked, "Are you afraid?" Newman poured another drink without looking at him. "I'm afraid of being seen loving someone I'm not allowed to love." Sal said nothing. He only reached for the lighter engraved with the letter P that Newman had left behind. After that, every time he saw the blue flame of that lighter, he remembered that this love existed in the dark. In June 1961, the National Enquirer ran a coy item: Paul Newman secretly meeting an actor who once worked with James Dean. No need to name names. All of Hollywood understood. Paul stayed silent, and Sal made the biggest mistake of his life. He told a reporter, "Paul is the man I love most." That confession shattered his career. The interview was pulled from every paper within hours. Warner Bros. Sent a notice terminating his contract. Sal's phone line was cut, and that evening there was a knock, a courier with a white envelope. Inside was a folded note. "Don't mention me or us." No signature, just a long stroke. The P dragged into a cold blade. Newman was silent. He didn't deny it, didn't defend him. He simply disappeared. For the next few months, Sal wasn't offered a single role. Newman, just a year later, became a global icon with The Hustler. People called him the Man of America. Every time Sal turned on the TV, that voice came on in a cologne commercial, deep, seductive, and distant. He drank, turned the TV off, then on again. One night, he admitted to a friend, "He killed me without even laying a hand on me." Admiration turned into hatred. He hated that smile, hated the way Newman always shone and never paid a price. He hated that he still loved the man who had buried him alive. He hated a world that forgave Paul while erasing him just for telling the truth. When Newman was asked about Exodus in an interview, he merely smiled. "I remember the film, not the boy." That sentence was the final stab. Sal heard it in a small bar in Los Feliz. He said nothing, set his glass down, smiled, and murmured to the bartender, "Some people don't need to kill anyone, because they know how to make others die on their own." From then on, Sal never mentioned Paul again. But in every role, his eyes still seemed to pin an invisible figure, a gaze that mixed love, hatred, and a hunger to forget. If you look closely at the last photographs of Sal, you'll see something in those eyes, a stray light, as if half waiting for Newman to return and half wanting to crush the memory forever. No one knows whether he truly hated Paul Newman or hated the weakness in himself. All we know is that, to the very end, whenever anyone mentioned Exodus, Sal would answer briefly, "That was the film that taught me that real love can kill a person." And the next man would make Sal Mineo hate in the opposite way, by proving that in Hollywood, love only lasts until someone turns on a microphone. 4. Bobby Sherman, the man who destroyed Mineo to save himself. That morning, smoke rose from the small apartment in Laurel Canyon. Neighbors thought Sal Mineo was cooking, but the smell wasn't from the stove. It was the smell of burning paper, burning photos, the smell of skin on metal. On the table lay an open newspaper, its bold headline, "Bobby Sherman, I love music, not men." A glass lay shattered. Sal sat still, watching the flames lick at an old photograph, two men smiling, a smile only one of them still believed was real. By 1963, Sal Mineo was no longer the boy who had dazzled America in Rebel Without a Cause. The stage lights had cooled. The studios had stopped calling. At 24, he learned to survive behind a cover. The press saw him holding hands with Jill Hayworth, a blonde from a powerful family, a sweet smile, the perfect other half for any leading man. They called it a beautiful romance. Sal called it a silence contract. Then, one afternoon on an NBC soundstage, Bobby Sherman appeared, a young singer with a clear voice and a face so gentle it still caught the glow of 17. Bobby came up and murmured, "What if I don't feel anything when I kiss a girl?" Sal smiled and replied, "Then maybe you haven't kissed the right person." No one knew that line would burn his life to the ground. From that day, they began to meet, secretly, softly, like two men playing with dynamite. The apartment rented under a false name in Laurel Canyon became a refuge for two souls running from the world. By day, Bobby still smiled on television, singing about love to girls in short skirts, and Sal still walked Jill into parties, the role of his life. But at night, the makeup fell away. Only breath, the smell of liquor, and the truth remained. Sal believed it was love. Bobby believed it was a moment. One of them was wrong. One morning, a gardener at the Beverly Hills Hotel said he saw Sal leaving, holding a ring identical to the one Bobby wore on TV. A small detail. But in Hollywood, small details can topple empires. A week later, Confidential received a reel. No images, only sound. Breathing, a creaking wooden bed, noises enough to construct an entire sin. No one knew who sent it, but in the anonymous letter attached, there was one line. They call it love. Jill Howarth was the first to hear it. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She quietly sent a copy to the Los Angeles Times, along with a handwritten note. I am Sal Mineo's fiancé, and I have heard him loving a man. By Monday, the story exploded. Everything Sal had, 2 film deals, a Broadway musical, a national talk show appearance, evaporated within 72 hours. His posters were taken down at theaters, his face ripped from magazines. Directors stopped calling. Studios scrubbed his name from their lists. Bobby Sherman vanished into silence. No more calls, no explanations. When he reappeared, he was smiling on television, reading a management-drafted statement in hand. I have no personal connection whatsoever to Sal Mineo. He signed it without reading it again. Sal read that statement in the paper and said nothing. That evening, he returned to the Laurel Canyon apartment and burned everything. Letters, photos, the scarf Bobby had left behind. As the fire caught the last photograph, the smell of melting plastic in the smoke, he whispered, "At least now we both disappear." The press called him Hollywood's first fallen gay star. The tabloids wrote, "From rebel to fallen." Friends drifted away, directors cut ties. In the public eye, Sal Mineo was no longer an actor. He was a living warning to anyone who dared love the wrong person. One night when the radio played a Bobby Sherman interview, that fresh young voice rang out, confident and clear. I love music, not men. That seemingly harmless line was the final blade. The glass in Sal's hand cracked. Red liquor bled across the table like a smear of blood. He didn't cry, he didn't smash anything. He only smiled, the tired smile of someone who finally understands that in Hollywood, everyone is afraid of being forgotten. And to survive, sometimes you have to kill the person who once saved you. Sal never spoke Bobby's name again. But in the notebook found after his death, there was a single slanted line. He didn't kill me, he just chose to live. And in this city, that's a crime worse than murder. After Bobby Sherman, Sal thought he was done believing in love. But Hollywood never runs out of ways to taunt the tender-hearted. This time, not one man would enter his life, but 2. 5. Tony Perkins and Brandon DeWilde. The triangle that shook the tabloids. Among all the people who passed through Sal Mineo's life, only 2 made him afraid to keep photos with them. One was Tony Perkins. The other was Brandon DeWilde. In the mid-1960s, Hollywood was like a sealed golden fortress, dazzling on the outside, cold on the inside. It was the era of morality clauses and publicity pairings built to hide the truth. Anyone with a different inclination was corrected, with a staged photo kissing the opposite sex or a sweetly fabricated romance planted in the press. As for Sal, who had once believed he could live honestly, by then he was just a name crossed off the list of potential leading men. He wasn't looking for love anymore. It was enough if someone understood the loneliness eating him from within. And then Tony Perkins appeared. Tony was tall, thin, and spoke slowly. He moved with a closed-off gait and had eyes so intelligent they made others fear being seen through. He had just played Psycho, a role that made America shudder and made Hollywood forever stop viewing him as ordinary. Perkins knew what it felt like to be looked at without being seen, and that was exactly what drew Sal toward him. Brandon DeWild was different. Young, bright, guileless. He walked in like a song in the wrong key, yet somehow made those two exhausted men remember that sometimes love begins with a gaze that's too clear. The three met at a charity party in Beverly Hills, where the flashbulbs were so blinding that no one dared be themselves. Some say Paul Newman introduced them. Others say it was just a coincidence. But after that night, everything changed. Tony spoke to Sal as if they were holding up the same soul to a mirror. Brandon sat quietly, watching, his eyes unable to hide a curiosity laced with longing. Near dawn, they left the party in 3 different directions. Yet hours later, staff at the Beverly Hilton saw all 3 step into the same elevator. Penthouse, top floor. The door closed. The hallway lights dimmed. The next morning, Movieland Confidential ran the headline, 3 male stars, 1 mysterious room. 6 hours later, the issue was recalled. No one knew Poirot. Only a leaked studio note remained. Avoid pairing DeWild with Mineo. Arouses suspicion. In Hollywood, 1965, the words arouses suspicion were enough to end a career. From then on, they were never mentioned together again. But those involved knew the thread hadn't snapped. Perkins still dropped by Sal's apartment a few times, past midnight, saying little, sitting quietly in a chair. Brandon would sometimes call, voice trembling, asking, "Do you think we're bad people?" Sal answered, "No, we just live in the wrong place." They existed like 3 mirrors tilted toward one another, reflective, distorted, and afraid to look straight on. Perkins gave Sal safety with his calm. Brandon gave him faith that youth could still redeem. But the 3 together could never last. Hollywood doesn't allow 3 wounded men to live honestly within the same frame. Then, one day, Tony vanished. He went to Europe for a film without a word. Brandon went silent. He didn't call back. Sal understood. Endings don't need to be spoken. The Beverly Hilton penthouse became a shared secret the 3 pretended to forget. Only Sal remembered every detail. The smell of liquor on Tony's hands, Brandon's boyish laugh, and that moment when the lights went out, 3 men touching as if trying to find themselves. After that, Tony married a female photographer. Brandon died in a car crash in Denver in 1972. Sal lived on but believed in nothing. In 1976, when a reporter asked Tony Perkins at a gala, "Do you know Sal Mineo?" he stood up and stepped out of frame without a word. That silent answer was denial enough. As for Brandon, when asked, his manager replied on his behalf, "No comment." Those 2 words, no comment, became the tombstone for a relationship everyone knew but no one dared admit. To Hollywood, it was just a faint rumor. To Sal, it was the last chapter of faith. After Perkins and Brandon, he no longer tried to love anyone. Because in that penthouse years earlier, among 3 men who believed they were different, Sal Mineo had learned a cruel truth. In this world, love doesn't need to be forbidden to turn tragic. It only needs someone to fall silent at the right moment. If the men before had broken Mineo's heart, the next made him fear for his life, because he offered not love, but a ticket into the hell called Hollywood. 6. Peter Lawford, the man of the dark parties. On the list of men Sal Mineo would never forgive, Peter Lawford stood at the top. not for love, but for power, not for betrayal, but for the pretense of kindness. Sal once told a friend, "I can take the ones who hurt me. I can't stand the ones who smile while watching me die." And Lawford was precisely that kind of man. In 1963, as President John F. Kennedy's funeral was broadcast nationwide, Sal sat quietly in his small West Hollywood apartment, bottle half empty, the black and white screen blurred by smoke. Among the rows of mourners, one face appeared. Peter Lawford, the president's brother-in-law, a Rat Pack member, the man who had once promised to protect Sal when Hollywood's doors began to close. On the screen, Lawford stood solemn, dignified, eyes moist. Only Sal knew he was performing. Sal hurled his glass against the wall. The shatter sounded like the crack of his last faith. He hated Lawford, hated the smile, the voice, the way he always arrived just in time to look clean in a filthy world of his own making. They had been friends, or so Sal had thought. It began a year earlier, at a Malibu party thrown by Frank Sinatra for the Rat Pack. Lawford arrived late, as usual, in a gray suit that smelled of gin and French cologne. When Sal was introduced, Lawford gave the polished smile of a man used to making others feel chosen. "There's something in your eyes that unsettles me," Lawford said. "And you," Sal replied, "seem used to saying things you don't believe." Lawford laughed and patted his shoulder. "You'll get on well with me." That line, half joke, half selection, marked the start of what Sal would later call a deal with the devil. After the party, Lawford invited him to the Santa Monica Villa. Private evenings with booze, pills, jazz, and men so powerful they didn't need to hide their appetites, only to pay for their disappearance afterward. Lawford introduced Sal to friends in the business, saying, "A few nights like this will open doors for you." After a few visits, Sal understood he wasn't being invited, he was being displayed. In his journal, Sal wrote, "I don't know what's worse, being stripped naked or realizing you're just a gift in someone else's hands." Then the Bobby Sherman scandal blew up. Hollywood turned its back. Lawford, who had said "no one will touch you," suddenly vanished. Someone at NBC whispered to Sal, "Peter's telling the press you're a deviant, saying to keep you away from the Kennedy house." Sal laughed it off as gossip, until Confidential ran The Young Star and the Rat Pack's Secret Nights. A reporter later revealed the source was Lawford himself. He sold Mineo out, they said, in exchange for keeping his own name off the FBI's list after that Palm Springs party. Sal read the article in an empty bar, his grip tearing the paper. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel pain, only disgust. "He calls it friendship," he said, "but he only knows how to use people to hide himself." After that, Paramount cut all ties. Directors who had once shaken his hand avoided his gaze. Everyone knew when Lawford spoke, people listened. For Sal, the hatred wasn't just an emotion, it was fear in human form. He wrote in his journal, "I've met men who pretended to love me. Lawford is different. He doesn't need to love. He only needs control." A year after Sal's death, Peter Lawford appeared on television in an interview called The Dark Side of Hollywood. When the host asked, "Do you think Hollywood has ever killed anyone?" Lawford raised his glass, smiled slightly. "Hollywood doesn't kill. Hollywood just forgets the weak." The audience laughed. The host changed the subject. Only one person didn't laugh, someone who had truly been forgotten by him. If there was anyone Sal Mineo despised to the very end, it wasn't the one who hurt him. It was the one who made him believe that everything beautiful in Hollywood was merely a pact with the devil, and he was the man collecting the debt. If Peter Lawford made Sal Mineo lose faith in people, the next would make him lose faith in himself. 7. Montgomery Clift. the ghost Mineo both admired and despised. No one on Sal's list of resentments gave him chills like Clift. The man who didn't betray him didn't use him, but existed like a living prophecy, reminding him that sooner or later Hollywood would grind him down in exactly the same way. They met in 1959, after Sal finished Giant, the film James Dean never lived to see released. By then, Clift was already a living legend, once on par with Dean and Brando, but the 1956 car crash had left his face altered, his voice warped, and his eyes forever seeming to look through a cracked mirror. People still called him a saint of method acting, but after the accident, Clift was merely a man self-flagellating with booze, sleeping pills, and endless sleepless nights. And what few knew, what Sal sensed at once, was that Clift was haunted not only by a dead career, but by a love he never dared to name. Montgomery Clift loved men. All of Hollywood knew, but no one was allowed to say it. MGM paid the press to print photos of him beside starlets, staged romances out of thin air, while Clift forced a smile in every frame, his eyes cold as if attending his own funeral. When Sal walked in, Clift looked up slowly, half his face in shadow. "You're the one replacing Dean, aren't you?" Sal froze. "No one replaces James." Clift gave a thin smile. "In Hollywood, everyone gets replaced. Only fear remains." The line felt like a curse. In the months that followed, they met again and again in New York, at theater parties, script readings, and sometimes on nights too late to be called coincidence. Ruined as he was, Clift still radiated a strange magnetism, the dark allure of someone who had touched the summit and fallen into the abyss. He didn't look at Sal like a senior at a junior, but like a man who had tasted forbidden fruit, watching another about to take his bite. One night, Clift invited Sal to his small Lexington Avenue apartment. Dim light, the smell of cigarettes and bourbon. On the table lay a dog-eared script of The Misfits, Marilyn Monroe's name crossed out and replaced with a handwritten line. "We all pretend." Clift leaned back, eyes half closed. "Do you know the worst thing in this business, Sal? When they make you act your truest self and still pretend it's only a role." Sal didn't answer. He understood too well. He too was living two lives, one for the world, one for himself. A few weeks later, Clift called him again. He was drunk, his voice choked. On the table was a scrapbook of magazine clippings. Dean, Brando, Elizabeth Taylor, and Sal. "They want me dead to keep my image intact," Clift whispered. "And you? How will they kill you?" Sal stayed silent. "Don't become me, Sal. I love men, but I'm a coward. I let them teach me to be ashamed of the very thing that keeps me alive." Sal looked at that face, half angel, half corpse, and knew he was staring at his future. They never met again. Clift died in 1966, alone in his apartment, his heart stopping while The Misfits played on TV. No phone calls, no one by his side. When Sal heard, he only said, "He died the way he lived, half hidden, half afraid of being seen." What he didn't say was that he feared the same path for himself. In a 1972 diary entry, written in blue ink, Sal wrote, "I hate Clift, not because he's cruel, because he shows me exactly how I'll end, in silence and in shame." Years later, when a reporter asked what he thought of Montgomery Clift-type actors, Sal gave a sad smile. "They taught me that sometimes living honestly is more dangerous than pretending." On the list of men Sal Mineo would never forgive, Montgomery Clift was the lone exception, a man he could neither love nor stop reflecting himself in. Because Clift did not betray him. He was the living evidence of a generation's tragedy, men who loved men, forced by the world to call that love by another name. If Montgomery Clift was the man who died for daring to live honestly, the next was the one who survived by pretending. And and that was what made Sal Mineo hate him more than anyone else. 8. George Nader, the survivor. By pretending, Sal Mineo never said openly that he hated George Nader. But on the nights he stayed awake, staring at his reflection in the window frame with streetlights slicing through the blinds, he knew if there was one man he despised to the core, it was George Nader. In 1963, George Nader was still a familiar face in mid-tier adventure films. Handsome, broad-shouldered, with blue eyes that seemed always ready to love some girl or other. But it was all an act. Backstage, everyone knew Nader lived with Mark Miller, lover and manager, the man with whom he built the perfect cover. Two best friends sharing a home and bank accounts, attending parties together, never locking eyes for more than 3 seconds in front of a camera. Sal met Nader at an audition for an indie in Hollywood. They smoked in the corridor, and when someone joked, "If these two handsome guys co-star, the girls will die," Nader just smiled and murmured, "I don't kill anyone, unless the script says so." The throwaway line made Sal's skin prickle. He realized Nader had learned to live exactly by the script Hollywood wrote for him. They started talking. Nader was courteous, careful, every sentence measured for safety. "Aren't you afraid of rumors?" Sal asked. "I don't fear rumors," Nader replied. "I fear the truth." From that moment, Sal knew he could never trust him. Nader was the model leading man who's never wrong. On screen, he loved women. Off screen, he smiled just enough, never got drunk, never let anyone see him weak. Once, at a party at Rock Hudson's house, Nader was in a corner spinning a funny story for reporters. Mark Miller stood beside him in silence, gripping his glass like the only real thing he had. When the flash popped, Nader instantly set the glass down, slipped an arm around an actress, and kissed her cheek. Watching it, Sal understood. He wasn't merely acting. He lived in that role every day. Years later, when the FBI began probing deviant behavior in entertainment, the McCarthy era's long shadow, a few names came under threat. Rock Hudson panicked, Tab Hunter was arrested, and Nader slipped through. People said he handed over part of a file in exchange for safety. No one confirmed it, but the rumor alone was enough for Sal to deny him forgiveness. "He bought his silence with other people's freedom," Sal told a close friend. "Then he taught me that silence is courage." By the late 60s, as Hollywood began loosening up around sensitive themes, Sal tried to launch a script about two soldiers in love at war. He sought out Nader, by then retired from acting, living quietly in Palm Springs, for advice. They sat on the porch, a light breeze blowing. Nader smiled gently. "I admire your courage, but you're asking the world to accept what it isn't ready for." Sal fell quiet. It was a line he both pitied and hated, because it contained the whole truth of Hollywood. To survive, you have to learn to die inside. When Sal was murdered in 1976, Nader sent white flowers to the funeral. No message, just a small card. From someone who understands. Courtney Burr read it, then crushed it, because understands was far too light a word for a sin that heavy. On Sal Mineo's list of unforgivable men, George Nader was neither a traitor nor a lover. He was the living proof of what Sal hated most: peace purchased by denying oneself. For Sal, that wasn't wisdom. It was a silent death, a tragedy without a funeral, because the world keeps insisting the man is still alive. And at the very end of his life, Sal Mineo finally met someone who didn't want to save him, didn't want to use him, only wanted to stay. And that love, the simplest of all, became the cruelest ending he would ever know. 9. Courtney Burr, the last love of Sal Mineo. A scream echoed through the quiet neighborhood of West Hollywood. A man burst out of an apartment, his hands covered in blood, his mouth repeating just two words. Sal, Sal. February 12, 1976, 9:30 p.m. That man was Courtney Burr. Police arrived less than 10 minutes later. They found him sitting on the curb, still holding the body of Sal Mineo, once a two-time Oscar nominee, once the boy who made America weep, now lying motionless, a deep stab wound beneath his left chest. In the 911 recording, Courtney's trembling voice can be heard, "Please, he's bleeding. The man I love has been murdered right in front of our home." That single sentence was enough to decide the rest of his life. Sal and Courtney met in 1969, when both attended an acting workshop in Los Angeles. Courtney was the instructor. Sal was the student, a fragment of a fallen star trying to rediscover himself. In Courtney's eyes, Sal was no longer an idol. He was fragile, lost, and still believed in miracles, long after Hollywood had stopped believing in them. They moved in together in 1970 into a small apartment on Holloway Drive. A neighbor recalled, "Whenever Sal had panic attacks, Courtney would turn on music and hold his hand until he fell asleep." For 6 years, they lived quietly. No secrecy, no spectacle, just away from the lights. Sal kept acting, teaching, dreaming of making his own film one day. Courtney stayed behind the scenes, fixing lines, handing him water, wiping sweat. The love was small, but it was real. Yet Hollywood never let anything real last for long. When Sal was invited back to the stage for P.S. Your Cat is Dead, the press began to notice. Some tabloids wrote that Mineo has a new man, younger, prettier, mysterious. Courtney refused interviews, but rumors spread faster for his silence. And when Sal died, the public needed only one question. Who was the last man with Sal Mineo? Police searched the apartment. Reporters surrounded the building. Within 3 days, Courtney Burr's name was on every front page. Not as the lover, but as suspect number one. One headline screamed, "Love, jealousy, and the death of a gay star." He said nothing. Not because he was guilty, but because he understood. In this world, truth never mattered as much as a story that sells. 3 months later, police arrested Lionel Ray Williams, a petty thief known in the area. He confessed. Yet the details didn't fit. Sal's wallet was untouched, there were no signs of struggle, and several witnesses swore they saw another man leaving the alley after the attack. The file was closed. No one asked again. Courtney vanished from Hollywood. He taught acting in a small Northern California town, never appeared on television, never attended another funeral. When a friend once asked why, he only said, "They think I survived. But really, I died that night with him." People said Sal Mineo died in a robbery. But Courtney believed, and many agreed, that Hollywood killed him by making the world believe he wasn't worth loving. Years later, when journalists mentioned Mineo's name, the same phrases repeated. Fallen star, gay tragedy, a sad end. No one called it what it was, a slow spiritual assassination that lasted 20 years. In a small notebook found later, Courtney had written, "I never knew who he hated most on that list, but I know he hated Hollywood itself for turning love into evidence." Every year, on February 12th, Courtney sent a single white rose to the grave at Forest Lawn, unsigned. The cemetery caretaker said, "He always stands there for a long time, like he's waiting for someone to answer." Maybe Sal never forgave the world, and maybe Courtney didn't either. Because in a city where love has to be written into a contract, those two men committed the same crime. They dared to love for real. None of the men on that list ever truly disappeared from Sal Mineo's life. They lived on inside him, each in a different shape, ghosts he wanted both to embrace and to banish. Perhaps Sal never truly hated them. He only hated how they made him believe he still had a chance. And as each one left, Sal remained with a heart full of wounds, not made by others, but by his own refusal to stop loving those who hurt him. Today, when people watch Rebel Without a Cause, they still see Plato's eyes, longing, terrified, so sincere they couldn't have been acting. That gaze didn't just belong to the character. It was Sal Mineo's final look toward a world that was never ready for his love. What do you think? Did Sal Mineo truly hate them, or did he only hate himself for loving the wrong people at the wrong time? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as we continue uncovering the hidden stories behind Hollywood's golden age.